Today we want to talk about when things go wrong for teenagers. Now right away you're going to look around and say, where are the teenagers to talk to? Well, we're all kind of teenagers in some sense of the word, I guess. Most of us have been teenagers at one time or another. And there are some things that the Bible says about a teenage boy that we can really learn some lessons from. I'm going to read just a little bit from the book of Genesis, chapter 37. Joseph, a young man of 17. I want you to remember that. He was 17 years old when this started. He was tending the flock with his brothers, and the sons of Bilhah and sons of Zilpah, and his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of the other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age. He made a richly ornamented robe and gave to him. When his brothers saw that the father loved him more than them, they hated him. They could not speak a kind word to him. Well, Joseph had a dream. And when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said, listen to this dream. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field, and suddenly my sheaf arose and stood upright, while your sheaves were gathered around mine, and they bowed down to mine. His brothers said, do you intend to reign over us? Well, I'm not going to read further, but I won't tell the story. He had another dream. The sun, the moon, and the stars were all bowing down to him. And there was a great deal of animosity here between Joseph, 17-year-old, and his brothers, who were much older than he was. Joseph, on the other hand, was the one who really taught them some lessons. Today, teenagers are interested primarily in getting ahead, in having good jobs, in having a lot of fun, things like that. I know, because I was a teenager one time. You might not believe that, but it's true. You were a teenager at one time, and you remember those things also. Responsibility was not really so much a part of our lives when we were teenagers. It was fun, wasn't it? It was who could be the flashiest, who could be the most popular in school, and it was all of these things. Well, let me tell you something. I was a teenager when Pearl Harbor was bombed. And I remember how when I was a teenager in school, a lot of my friends had their fathers, and in some cases their mothers, who had to go to war. And some of the teenagers had to assume the roles of parents in helping to raise the smaller children. There was a great deal of emphasis on individual responsibility. There was a great deal of emphasis on the unity of the family and how the family had to work together to bring about some of these things. I remember my father-in-law telling me when he was just a little boy of about 13 years old. His father, who was a farmer in Mississippi, he sent him with some messages and some supplies on an overnight trip on a horse to another city. Somehow or another, the importance of individual responsibility was really a very, very important thing in that day. Well, let's take a look at Joseph for a minute. 17-year-old guy. His brothers didn't like him at all. As a matter of fact, they hated him. A lot of trouble in that family. There were about 13 children altogether. One girl, and the rest were boys. And the boys hated this young man, this 17-year-old brother that they had. Well, Joseph went out. He was sent by his dad, and he went to another town to see how the brothers were getting along keeping the sheep. They saw him coming. They could tell who he was because he had this ornamented coat that he wore, that his dad had given him. And they saw him coming, and they said, uh-oh, here comes that dreamer. Let's kill him. And one of his brothers said, no, let's don't kill him. Let's throw him in this empty cistern over here. That was Reuben. And so they did. They threw him in the empty cistern. But then while they were eating and so forth, and while Reuben was away, the other brothers saw a caravan coming. It was on its way to Egypt. And they said, why do we sell him? Why do we sell him as a slave to this caravan? Not a bad idea. Well, what will we tell our dad? Well, what we'll do, we'll just kill one of the goats, splash blood over this thing, over this robe that he has. After we splash blood on it, we'll take it to the father and say, Dad, do you know who this belongs to? Oh, yeah, that's Joseph. He must have been killed by some wild animal. So that's what they did. Joseph is out of our hair. Joseph is on his way to Egypt as a slave boy. Well, he got to Egypt. A man by the name of Potiphar, who was a captain of the guard for Pharaoh, Potiphar bought Joseph. And Joseph went to work in Potiphar's house. And whoa, Joseph was a good servant. Joseph made the very best of things. And Potiphar just had so much confidence in Joseph, he turned the whole house over to him. And then Potiphar's wife, remember this is a 17-year-old guy, maybe 18, 19 by now. Potiphar's wife tried to seduce him. And he said, I won't have anything to do with that. And he turned and started to run away. She grabbed his coat and it ripped off of him. And then she really angry. So when Potiphar came home from work that night, she said, you see this coat? It belongs to Joseph. He tried to have an affair with me. Whoops. She lied. Potiphar didn't like that. But he had Joseph thrown in jail. Well, when Joseph was in jail, he was the best inmate they had in the jail. And the jailer turned the whole works over to him because he was such a trustworthy character. Not bad. One day, there were a couple of other prisoners in there. One was the chief baker and one was the chief butler for the king. And they were all troubled over something, and as Joseph passed by their cell or whatever, however it might have been, he said, what's the matter, guys? They said, oh, we've had a couple of dreams, and we think there's some meaning to them, but we don't know what they mean. Dreams? Oh yeah, I've had some experience with dreams. Tell me your dream. And one of them said, well, I had a dream, and these three things here and so forth. And Joseph said, you know what that means? That means that in 3 days, you're going to be restored back to your old job. The chief baker says to himself, that sounds good to me. Let me tell you what my dream was. And he told him what his dream was. And he had 3 stacks of bread up on his head and all this sort of thing. And so Joseph said, it's tough, man, because that means in 3 days, they're going to execute you. You're going to be killed in 3 days. Well, Joseph said to the chief butler that when you are restored to your position, remember me to the king. I'm here on a false charge. Well, the butler apparently was just so glad to get out of there that he forgot about that. 2 years passed, and the king had a dream, and this really troubled him. And he got all the soothsayers around, and everything, and said, "What does the dream mean?" They said, "We don't know. We don't have any idea." And then the chief butler says, "Oh, I remember something. When I was in jail, there was a fellow in jail that I should have told you about a long time ago. But there was a fellow in the jail named Joseph, and I had a dream, and he told me what it meant, and surely enough, it came true." Pharaoh says, "Go get him." They brought Joseph in, and Joseph said, "Tell me your dream." And the king said, "Well, I had this dream. There were 7 healthy sheaves of grain that came up out of the river. And then there were 7 really terrible, wilted, no good sheaves of grain. And the bad sheaves of grain went over and ate up the good sheaves of grain. But they were still bad." And then I had another dream. He said, "I saw 7 big fat cows come up out of the river. And then there were 7 skinny, lean cows, sickly cows. They came up out of the river and they ate up all of the 7 good cows. But they were still skinny and sickly." Here's what Joseph said. He said, here's what it means. Egypt is going to have 7 years when bumper crops. Everything's going to produce real heavily. But there's going to be 7 years following that. It's going to be a terrible famine. So I tell you, king, what you better do. You better appoint somebody to store up all the grain they can find during this 7 years so that we'll have plenty of grain during the famine. Pharaoh said, "Who?" Well, I don't know whether he said who or not, but that was the idea. He said, "Who can I get to do this?" "Oh, I know what I'll do. I think Joseph would be a good man to do that." So they made Joseph kind of the governor. He was second in command of Egypt. And he brought in this grain, and stored it. They dug silos, which, by the way, archaeologists have discovered some silos, grain silos that date right back to this approximate time. And surely enough, along comes this terrible famine. And the famine was not just in Egypt, it was in Canaan as well. Well, you see, Joseph's brothers are still living back there in Canaan. His dad's still living back there in Canaan. They didn't know anything about where Joseph was, what he was doing, or anything about the cows coming up out of the river, or the dream, or anything like that. All of a sudden, there's a famine. They run out of food. Oh, Jacob, the father, he said, "I understand there's food down in Egypt. Why don't you guys go down to Egypt and get us some grain?" Okay, they did. They went down to Egypt. Now, this is years later, many years later. Joseph now, instead of being 17 years old, Joseph is about 39 years old. Things change. People change. Appearances change. And up come the boys. And they are going to buy grain to carry home. And who do they buy it from? Joseph, their brother. They didn't recognize him. Who would ever have thought that this 17-year-old slave boy was going to be in a governmental position now? And so they went and they bought this grain. Joseph recognized them. Sold the grain. Then Joseph says, "I tell you what," not to his brothers, but to the people who were in, working. He said, "Take all the money that they gave us, put it back in the tops of the sacks of grain. When they get back home, they'll have their grain, but they'll have their money too. And so they went back home, and surely enough, there was the money. Well, while they were down there, Joseph asked him some questions. Is your dad still alive? Yes, he's still alive. Is this the whole family? He said, well, it's a whole family except, well, our younger brother is at home. His name's Benjamin. And we had another brother, but, well, something happened to him. And so Joseph said, the next time you come, I want you to bring your younger brother with you. Well, they didn't want to do that, but they went home and they told the father, said, next time we go down there, we got to carry Benjamin. And Jacob said, no, you're not going to take Benjamin. Said, Joseph is gone, my favorite boy, and now Benjamin, the youngest one in the whole works, no, you're not going to take him. And they said, Pop, good father, they said, he's not going to give us any grain unless we bring Benjamin. And so finally, Jacob agreed that he would let Benjamin go. So they went down there and they bought the grain. When they loaded everything back, they put the money back in the sacks again, but they did something else. They took Joseph's own silver cup and they put that silver cup in Benjamin's sack. And as they were starting home, Joseph said to the guards, go get those guys. Somebody in that bunch stole my silver cup. So they went there and said, no, none of us took it. And one of them said, if you find it, whoever has it, we'll kill him. They opened up the sacks. Whoops. Benjamin's sack has a silver cup in it. Benjamin, what in the world are you doing? I didn't do anything. But they went back, and through a series of very dramatic things, Joseph finally revealed to them who he was. And the whole family came down to Egypt. Jacob died, the father, he died. And can't you just imagine this? Our brother that we sold as a slave is now one of the rulers of Egypt. And our fathers died. And now, what's going to happen to us? So they went and they told Joseph, now, we're sorry for what we did. And Joseph said something, he said, you meant to harm me. God meant it for good. This rings a bell because in the 15th chapter of Genesis, God had made a statement that Abraham, your descendants are going to be in a strange land for 450 years. And they'll be mistreated and they will be enslaved. But they will finally come out and occupy this land where you live, Abraham. And so Joseph says to his brothers now, you see, God meant this for good. You meant it for evil. Now, that's the historical background, very, very briefly. By the way, go home and read chapters 37 through chapter 50 of the book of Genesis. It's a great, great story. If you've never read it, you need to read it. Well, let's stop and ask ourselves a few questions here. Two questions in particular. How does God work in the lives of His people? And the other question is, how did Joseph respond to the terrible things that happened to him? Okay, let's take the second question first. How would you have responded? Your brothers gang up on you when you're 17 years old and they sell you as a slave. Boy, just wait till I got hold of my brothers. How would you have responded to that? You and I would both probably have been terribly resentful, angry, ready to do something bad to our brothers for doing such a terrible thing to us. If I could ever get them back, I would show them. No, Joseph didn't respond that way. You see, Joseph taught us a lesson. A teenage boy, a 17-year-old guy, he realized something that is so hard for me to realize. What happens to me is not what counts. I can lose my job. I can have tragedy in the family. I can be unhappy. I can be in poverty. I can have all kinds of bad things happen to me. That's not what shapes me. The question is, how do I respond to what happens to me? We are taught, like the sign I told you about across the street from me when I lived over in Scotland, says, forget the dog, be the owner. Okay? Get them back. Hurt them. Show them who's boss. Don't let them trample on you. And there's all kinds of things like that, that our culture teaches us. Our parents sometimes teach, fight back. When somebody abuses you, takes advantage of you, get them back. What did Joseph do? Joseph responded in a godly way. I don't know what all his dad taught him, what all his mom taught him, but somewhere along the line, he picked up the idea that trusting in God when things go wrong, trusting in God might not get me out of this situation, but it'll equip me to endure the situation. That was Joseph's response. So, he gets a good job. Did a real good job at Potiphar's house. And Potiphar's wife turned against him, falsely accused him. They threw him in jail. How did he respond? I don't belong here. I'm innocent. And I'm going to show you I'm not going to do anything the jailer says. I'm going to be the worst prisoner you ever saw. I'm going to give you such a hard time, you'll want to change your job. No. That's not the way he responded. He responded with the best. Just like at the house of Potiphar, he was the best servant. They turned the whole thing over to him. In jail, he was the best prisoner. Turned the whole jail over to him. That was his response. Positive response. And then, now I've got my chance. The butler is going to be restored to the king, and now somebody will plead my cause. Didn't work. 2 years went by. How did Joseph respond? Boy, if I could just get my hand on that butler, I would wring his neck. That butler is a real jerk. He's a real slouch. He didn't do a thing for me, and look what I did for him. No, Joseph didn't respond that way. Finally, he come before the king, and he responded to the king. And then when his brothers came down to get grain, what? Now I got you. Now I got you. I'm going to make slaves out of every one of you, just like you made out of me. You made a slave out of me. I've been away from home all this time. I've been working as a slave. Now I'm going to get you back. Every single one of you are going to become slaves, and we're going to torture you. No. He loved his brothers. He set a big banquet for them. And he finally wept, and he told them who he was. He says, is Dad still alive? Yeah, he's still alive. Bring the whole family down here. They brought the whole family down there. That was the way he responded. You see, in adversity, We need to respond with trust. When things go wrong for a teenager, he trusted. He did the best he could with what he had. When things go wrong with us in families, when things go wrong with us at business and jobs and community, whatever it might be, how do we respond? We have to respond with trust. With trust. Let's look at it from a different perspective. When things go right, I like the way things are. I've got a good job, get good pay, got a good family. Life could not be better. God is blessing me like everything. Yeah, that's pretty easy. Well, something happened. My kids get sick. My wife gets sick. My wife dies. I lose my job. The whole world is caving in on me. Where are you, God? What have I done? I've been serving you, and now look what you've done to me. Isn't that kind of the way the world looks at things? Don't we look at things that way sometimes? Look at Job. He had so much, and he lost it all. Job says, I'm going to trust in God. I don't know why it happened, but I'm not going to forsake God just because the circumstances of my life have changed so terribly. How am I going to react to this? I'm going to react to it in trust, in confidence. I don't know why it happened. I wish it hadn't happened. But I'm not going to say to God, God, what have I done that you didn't like? That now you're taking everything away from me. No. That's the way it was with Joseph. Everything was crashing in on him. Let's stop and ask a few questions going back. Okay, Joseph is elevated to the governor of Egypt. We'll call him governor, something like that. Oh, God is with me. God is with me. I know He is. Just look at all that He's blessing me with now. God is with me. Let's move back. He's in jail, but the butler forgets about him. God, why did you let him forget? Look at what I did for him. Do you think that Joseph may have said, oh, the butler has forgotten me. I can tell God is with me because the butler has forgotten me. No, we don't have this oscillation here. Move it back a step. He's in Potiphar's house. Everything is going well. Potiphar says, you're the best servant I ever had. Turn the whole thing over to you. Oh, God, thank you. Thank you, God, I know you're with me. Now he's falsely accused of adultery and thrown in jail. Can you see? Oh, God, I'm so glad you threw me in jail. I'm so glad that I got thrown out of that house. I can tell you're with me, God, because things are so bad. No, not that way. Move it back again. Here's this 17-year-old boy. He goes down to see how his brothers are getting along. They throw him in an old empty cistern. There's no water in it, just a big hole in the ground. They throw him in this empty cistern. Can't you just see Joseph say, God, I know you're with me. I'm here in this cistern. They may abandon me. They no telling what they might do to me. But I know you're with me, God. Just think of how many things, bad things are happening to me. I know you're with me. No, that's not the way people react to adversity, is it? What I'm trying to say is this. I don't know how God works in our lives. The Bible doesn't tell us how. It tells us that He does, but it doesn't tell us how He does. And so I am in this terrible circumstance. And my evaluation of this terrible circumstance is, God is not with me. He's punishing me. No, not necessarily. Maybe that's a part of the whole sequence. You see, God said to Abraham, Abraham, your descendants are going to be in a strange land for 450 years. Joseph turns out to be the one through whom God is going to carry out his promise. But all of these things had to happen before God's promise could come true. So the adversities of my life, the terrible things that happen in my life, the successes of my life, the good things that happen to me in my life, these are not to be evaluated on the basis of, now I know God's with me, oh no, God not with me. Now God is blessing me, no, God is not blessing me. No, not that at all. Let's learn to trust Him in all of the circumstances of life and let Him work in our lives. No, I can't look at a particular circumstance and say, God is working in my life through that circumstance. No, but a lot of times I can look back on some things and I can see how God has blessed me, even in adversity, even when bad things happen to me, even when hearts are broken and families are broken. But if we trust in Him, we can see His hand all the way through all of this. And so what I'm trying to say to us, friends, is this. Here's a teenage boy. Things went terribly bad for him, but because he stood by the Lord, because he trusted in God, because he didn't allow the bad circumstances of his life to cause him to resent God and turn away from God, because of those things, it brought out the very best in him. It brought out the trust. It brought out the loyalty. It brought out the faith. It brought out the perseverance of this man. And through the whole thing, finally, God's will was brought about. I tell you, that's a great story. When we look at it from the point of view of how God worked in this situation, and we see in ourselves the adversity of life, the losses in life, as well as the good things in life. Let God work in your life. Trust in Him to carry you through. Or as Peter said, cast all of your cares on Him because He cares for you. Sometimes it's hard to learn. Joseph learned it. Joseph practiced it. Can we learn it? Can we practice it? We're going to sing an invitation song now. If you're subject to the gospel, you're not a Christian, this is a wonderful time to just come forward and say, I want to be baptized today. I want to become a Christian. I want to become a follower of Christ. If you believe in your heart, if you'll turn away from your sin, He's promised when you're baptized into Him to give you the hope of eternal life. Let's stand together, please, and sing.